Good morning and welcome back. I'm Bonnie Colleen, and we've got a wonderful 2 hours for you today. It's going to be very provocative programming. Of course, we'll open the phone lines up and invite you to call in and ask your own questions. Many of you remember Stephen Hewer. He's the founder of Cocoon Nutrition. He's been a frequent guest on Seeing Beyond in the past, and he's actually here today co-hosting the program with me and sponsoring the program. So I want to thank you, Steve, and Cocoon Nutrition, which is located in Sunnyvale. We'll be talking a little bit about that and how people can connect with you and get their alternative and holistic health needs met. But I would like for you, first of all, please, before we bring Dove onto the program, and that is a kind of a name that she uses for a specific reason, and she'll explain that. I'd like for you to introduce her and why you decided to not only co-host the program with me, but also to sponsor Dove and her work, her message, and her ideas.
Sure. It's long been a passion of mine to understand the subject of the Founding Fathers in our country and what they intended, the kind of design of government that everyone in America was intentionally to be self-governing, and that we would govern ourselves based upon certain broad principles, and that you could do whatever you want so long as you hurt no one else and nobody else's property, and you were civil about things. And this was the founding and the simplistic definition of the Constitution, and then your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness could actually come out of that foundation. And today, what we have is something 180 degrees opposite of that, in which people are ruled through fear and intimidation, military and police force. And what Dove's going to share with us today is so inspiring, because there are people within government who want us to get back to the original design, and there have been plans that have been made to do so. And she knows she's an authority on this subject, on a law that was passed. It's been, in its acronym, it's pronounced N.E.S.A.R.A. And what she can share today can fill us with hope and make us so that we can work with our government and let them know that we would like this particular law enacted. So it's my honor to sponsor her on your show and have her share this vital subject.
Don and I have had very little chance to talk ahead of the program, just enough to explain to her that I needed some information about herself, her background, and about NESARA, so that I could do a good job here of highlighting her and her work. You have, of course, talked with her before, and we're going to be highlighting the work that she does. And let me just formally introduce you, Dove. It's good to have you here on the program with us.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Why don't you, first of all, explain why you use the name Dove and why you're not using your actual name?
Okay. In the late 90s, I joined a humanitarian project group, and as part of that group, we are going to be helping to change the world by receiving massive amounts of funds that have been accumulated in Europe for many, many years, for the purpose of improving the world, things like cleaning up the environment, providing alternative health care options, helping people to have homes, food, shelter, everything that we know is needed out there, someone in these humanitarian project groups wants to do. And probably many people will be attacking these different needs that we have around the world. There have been wealthy visionaries that put programs together to fund improvement projects, but they could not do it all themselves. They needed people who cared about the world to help do it. And so they actually had people go out and recruit others who wanted to help improve the world and who had an alternative view of what was needed in the world. And I was one of those people. Now, I've been writing about the progress of these humanitarian projects for about 3 years. And when I originally started to write about them on the Internet, I knew that it wouldn't be real smart to have my real name out there, because as you might guess, if someone has a lot of money, people know how to find that person is having visits from people who want to request funds. So it's not a good thing to have your real identity out there when you're tracking this kind of thing and writing about it. We will have ways for people to give us their ideas about what needs to be done. I will at least, and I know other people will be, looking for people who want to help on these projects. So it's going to be very broad-based. It's going to be very much the people helping to restore our world and our people to good health and prosperity and happiness. That's why I have to use a pseudonym.
And Deb, I want to more formally introduce you and let people know a little bit about your background. Dove holds a bachelor's in business administration from City University in Bellevue, Washington, and a bachelor's in social sciences from Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. Her education and 20 years experience in business and large computer systems give her insights into some of the complexities of the NESARA, and that is an acronym, N.E.S.A.R.A, stands for the National Economic Security Act. So that's given her insights into some of the complexities of NESARA preparations and activities. She has a history of activism in supporting alternative health options, world peace, and a return to the Constitution. Why don't we start there, Deb? We've got so much to cover, and that's why I'm so grateful to Stephen Hewer for sponsoring you on for the full 2 hours. And again, I will be opening up the phone lines and certainly inviting Sing Beyond listeners to ask their own questions of you a little bit later. What do you mean by return to the Constitution, and why is that important in your eyes?
Well, it's very important. Very few people really understand that Franklin Delano Roosevelt took us out of the Constitution in 1933. He made a small change in one of the War Powers Acts that essentially made the people the enemy of the country. And there are many War Powers Acts, by the way. People don't understand. I don't have the exact name of that one in front of me. But he made a small change, and it took us out of constitutional law. We have not been in constitutional law since that point. And we can look at our laws, and we can look at how invasive the government has become in our lives, and how, especially in the last 2 years, of course, with the Bush regime, how we are not being allowed to live our Bill of Rights. We do not have our constitutional law protection, and there's a tremendous amount of government interference in everything we do, in our personal lives, in tracking us, in our business, in our bank accounts, all kinds of places. So returning to constitutional law takes all of that government interference out of our lives, and it's going to be a massive improvement. I can only imagine how relieved people will be when they finally realize what this does for them. It also makes our government be cleaned up. We have a tremendous amount of corruption in our government, in our banking system, in our legal system. All of these will be changed, and the people who are bringing this to us have very concrete activities and plans that will be carried out after NESARA is announced to clean up all of this corruption. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And so what you're saying is we're going to be coming back more to the way that our forefathers envisioned the country?
Exactly. We'll be going back to constitutional law, which is based on common law, which, as Stephen said earlier, is based on you have the right to do what you wish to do as long as you do not harm anyone else or their property, and you are acting, as he said, with some civility. There's a tremendous amount of latitude to live a uncomplicated and free life under common law and constitutional law that is not available to us today. We're looked over in every respect in our lives. Even now the government can get into your medical records and everything else. And that all will be totally null and void. The judges and law enforcement people, after NESARA is announced, will go to education seminars. They will be re-educated about how to deal with constitutional law. And what the statutory law we have now, almost all of that is going to be removed because it does not meet constitutional law requirements. So there's going to be a great re-education right after NESARA is announced. And then we will have tremendous amounts of education on television and radio as well that will help the citizenry to understand what constitutional law really is and what their rights are. The entire Bill of Rights will be restored, and some of the amendments to the Constitution will be removed.
We're going to be talking in great detail about NESARA. Now, that's an acronym. You spell it N.E.S.A.R.A. It stands for the National Economic Security and Reformation Act. We're going to be coming back and getting a detailed definition of that from our guest, Dove. And I want to let you know how you can also find out more information yourself on the Internet at www.NESARA.com, and I'll spell that for you, N-E-S-A-R-A now.com, or send an email with the subject of subscribe to Dove at 4winds10.com. So that's Dove at F-O-U-R wins and then the number 10.com. Dove does daily reports on the Internet regarding the status of NESARA and related subjects 7 days a week. And all of her radio interviews are being made available on the Internet, and also you can find them by going to www.NESARAnow.com. We've got lots more in this provocative programming. I'm glad you're with us. I'm Bonnie Colleen, and you are seeing beyond. Welcome back. I'm Bonnie Colleen here with my co-host Stephen Hewer. I'm sure that many of you remember him being on the program. He is the founder of Cocoon Nutrition in Sunnyvale. Their toll-free number is 1-888-988-3325. That's 888-988-3325. And you can find out more about Stephen and his work at cocoonnutrition.org. We're here today co-hosting a woman named Dove, who is a member of a humanitarian project group. And after the NESARA law is announced, and you spell that N-E-S-A-R-A, it stands for National Economic Security and Reformation Act. After that law is announced, Dove says that she and thousands of other Americans will be receiving great amounts of money to do world improvement projects. Because Dove has been writing about the humanitarian projects funding on the Internet, she uses the pen name Dove of Oneness to maintain her privacy and avoid having thousands of people show up on her doorstep to ask for money after NESARA is announced. Dove, it really is good to have you here with us. And Steve, thanks so much for being here, too. You know a lot about this subject.
Dove, I just wanted to bring you back on and let the listeners go forward with you hearing or introducing them to how NESARA came about and what it would mean once it was implemented. So going back to the whole farmers bringing the court case to the Supreme Court and all that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. Yes, actually since the 1960s, there have been people in this country who have been very aware of the serious corruption in our government and in our banking systems and our legal systems, all those three pieces seriously corrupted from what it was supposed to start out, what it started out with under the Constitution and our founders. And the Farmers Union is a loose-knit group of independent farmers who in the 60s were having a lot of foreclosures. I'm sure we all remember that Willie Nelson has been doing Farm Aid concerts for years to help the farmers to try to save their farms. And even before Willie stepped in, these farmers were having tremendous numbers of foreclosures. And they began to wonder what was going on here. It didn't make sense. They did some research, and they found out that the banks were fraudulently foreclosing on their farms in many cases, that the banks were breaking the rules of foreclosures and many times had big farming corporations in the wings waiting to buy these farmlands up. In addition, the Farmers Union went further. They went to the government. They said, how come you're not helping us? You know, this is a problem. And they found out that some of the government personnel were being bribed to look the other way. And after that, they also found that they were as they were doing court cases up and down the state courts in the U.S., they were being harassed by the IRS. And they found out that farmers who were supporting these court cases and carrying these court cases forward were being targeted by the IRS to be harassed, to try to slow them down, try to dissuade them from doing these court cases. So then the farmers investigated the IRS, and they found people who had done the research that proved that the IRS amendment had never been ratified by the states. And in fact, the Secretary of State of the United States at the time that this was supposedly ratified had flat out lied. And they at the government level, at the federal level, they had actually manufactured paperwork in this Secretary of State's department, and with the help of certain other states, to try to pretend to have false documentation that they presented as real, that the amendment for the income tax amendment had ever been passed, but in fact it never was ratified by the states. So this all came out eventually. It took from the 1960s up through to 1993 for the Farmers Union to get their case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And I really have to give those people credit because they fought a hard battle. There were times when they had to retreat and kind of regather their resources and then go at it again. So for roughly 30 years, these people fought this battle, and most of us didn't know about it. When they got to the Supreme Court, they presented their evidence, and they also had some additional evidence by that time. They'd been doing a lot of research, a lot of contact. People had come forward, and one of them was a retired CIA agent who came into court with documentation and proof that what they were alleging was true. He had actually been an agent who had been put on light duty and put into a documentation warehouse, and he found all kinds of documentation that supported what the farmers were alleging in their lawsuits against the federal government and the banking system, the Federal Reserve banking system. So that then brought the judges a great deal of proof, as well as the proof was brought into court that the IRS amendment had never been properly ratified. And in early 1993, the justices made the unanimous decision that the Farmers Union was correct, that the government had colluded in fraud with the banking system and the foreclosures by the banking system, and that the IRS amendment had never been ratified, and therefore they had a great deal of things they had to deal with to implement their rulings. And what do you know, have you ever heard about how the U.S. Supreme Court actually goes about implementing their rulings?
No.
Okay. Well, I hadn't either. So in researching this, what I learned is that when the U.S. Supreme Court does make a ruling, they appoint one or more justices to carry out, to develop steps, concrete steps that carry out the rulings. In this case, they realized that massive government reform was needed, massive banking reform was needed. They determined that the Federal Reserve fiat banking system, which fiat money is money that's not backed by anything, and it's based on fractional banking, and that was not constitutional. They determined that the banks owed the people remedies, they owed them financial remedies because of this massive amount of fraud that had been done for many years, and that we needed to change our banking system to a U.S. Treasury bank system and not the Federal Reserve banking system.
Deb, could you expand on that subject momentarily, since a lot of people don't know the origins of our money and our national debt?
I think that's really important.
Yes, very good. Actually, a lot of people are maybe not aware of who owns the Federal Reserve, but I called the office of Representative Ron Paul. I and a friend researched this in October, and his staffer, Norm Singleton, told us that the Federal Reserve is owned by 12 private and public corporations. Now, the reason I called Representative Ron Paul, U.S. Congressman Ron Paul, is because he has a bill that he introduced in September to abolish the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a private corporation. It's not part of the U.S. government. It never has been. And it takes the lion's share of our income tax money as payment on a debt that is basically a rigged kind of debt. It's a setup. The Federal Reserve charges the U.S. government fees and interest in order to put out the money, to distribute the money and run the banking system. But those fees and interest cause a large part of our national deficit. That's a large part of the deficit that the government's always talking about. They don't ever tell you, or very rarely do they ever tell anyone or publish where all of this so-called debt is actually owed, but it's mainly owed to the Federal Reserve. And what the Federal Reserve does then is that they buy the debt from the government. It's a very circular kind of system that's designed to keep us in perpetual debt. We would never get out of debt with the Federal Reserve banking system. Never. The country would just go deeper and deeper into debt.
So, Deb, we have about 3 minutes before we need to take a break. What then would be the difference if we went to a U.S. Treasury system rather than the Federal Reserve?
Well, with the U.S. Treasury system, number one, we have new currency coming out. It's already been printed. It's sitting on shelves waiting to come out. It's backed by precious metals. And it takes us away. There's no charging, as one of the congressmen said, the U.S. government rents its money. There's no charging from the U.S. Treasury Bank system for doing our banking system. It just takes care of it like it was constitutionally supposed to do from the very beginning. So that entire national debt thing goes away immediately.
Well, I think something that you mentioned is vitally important, and that is that this new currency would be backed up by precious metals. So it really does mean something. It really does have measurable value.
Right. And Greenspan, surprisingly enough, wrote his doctoral thesis on a monetary system backed by precious metals and or gold. Most people think of it as the gold standard. And he is a large proponent of this, and he helped to write this part of the N.E.S.A.R.A law. And it's surprising that he has kept this other system going, but he has stayed there to make sure that this new system got put in place. And he's a very dedicated man. In fact, he started out as a libertarian. Most people don't know that. So this will change everything. We will have gold, silver, and platinum backing our new U.S. Treasury currency. And that will make our money worth something and stop the inflation almost totally.
Now, you say will. We're talking about the future tense, and yet I know because of the materials that you have sent to me that much of what you're talking about you feel is imminent. What do you mean by imminent?
It could be literally any day that they announce N.E.S.A.R.A. And most of the preparation is done. There are times when interferences show up that have to be taken care of before it can be announced. And there are certain timings that the people in charge of doing this look for, certain things that are beneficial to the timing of the announcement. And we're in one of those windows.
One of the things that I can guarantee people is that if this does happen, we're going to have lots and lots of changes. Now, the interesting thing is that the year 2003, when you add those numbers together, 2 plus 0 plus 0 plus 3 equals 5, and any of you out there listening who know numerology know that the number 5 is all about change, 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 and change. Well, you know, that is the one thing that we can count on. I think this is a very provocative, intriguing, and I know you'll want to call in topic for the close of the year 2002 and the beginning of a whole new year heralded by change. We're here today with Dove, and again, you can find out more about her and her work at www.nesaranow.com. Let me spell that for you. It's N-E-S-A-R-A now.com. She does daily reports on the Internet regarding the status of NESARA and related subjects. She does that 7 days a week. And I'm here with Stephen Hewer, co-hosting the program. You can find out more about him and his work at cocoonnutrition.org. Well, one thing we know is if this does happen, there's going to be a lot of change. But what exactly does Dove see happening? It's going to preview that. That's next, right here on Seeing Beyond. Stephen Hewer of Cocoon Nutrition, and I am interviewing Dove, and you can email her and communicate with her yourself personally at Dove at 4winds10.com. That's Dove at F-O-U-R-winds, then the number 10.com. Deb, it's really good to have you here with us. And, I mean, we've got reams and reams of information and tons that we can talk about. But I want to really get to the point here because people want, I mean, we're at the hinge point of a brand new year. My listeners want to know what's going to happen next. And they're asking seers and prophets and clairvoyants and numerologists and astrologers and all of that. about the future. You have some real keys to that. What would you say would be the 3 most important, significant changes if this NESARA law were to come into effect the beginning of 2003? How would it change my listeners' lives on a daily basis?
Okay. Well, the main things that NESARA gives us, right off the bat, the IRS is abolished. The instant that NESARA is announced, the IRS will cease to collect taxes.
Wait a minute, I was always taught growing up that the 2 things you could count on are death and taxes.
Neither of those are going to be true in the next few years. We are, I'll just say this, I want to get back to this later because yours is the right kind of venue for me to talk about this. The reason I do this work is because I know we are in the pivotal times of the Great Shift. This is the shift of the ages that Greg Braden talks about and many major cultures have talked about. NESARA is key to this shift of the ages. This is why I do this work, because I'm here to make sure this shift gets done. And so are you. So is Stephen. Many of us are here to make sure this gets done. So let's talk about that later, about the spiritual aspect of this, because there is one. But right now, what will happen? Initially, there will be about a 15-minute announcement process, and it will be a series of things. The first thing is that we will see part of the NESARA law announced. We will see the resignation speeches of Bush and Cheney. We will then have our NESARA designates sworn in, and they will discuss the major points of NESARA, which is that the IRS is immediately terminating its tax collection activities. It will only do refunds, and it will be closed entirely by midsummer, that there will be debt forgiveness immediately, bank debt forgiveness. All credit card accounts that are issued by U.S. banks will be zeroed out immediately, as well as there will be forgiveness of mortgage debt and or relief of mortgage debt. Essentially, it depends on when your mortgage was taken out. You'll either have outright forgiveness or there's a plan to pay off your mortgage for you in a short amount of time. And that will be something that American citizens will apply for. Also, there will be all bank debt, loans, and things of that type will be either forgiven or relieved. And the relieved is basically that the bank and or mortgage company goes through a process to create revenue that will be a new kind of revenue creation process coming in with NESARA that hasn't been allowed in this country for 80 years or something like that.
But how will we go through this shift? How will we go through this transition? How will various agencies and support groups be funded if we're not paying taxes and if the banks are forgiving our debt or at least lessening it?
Very good. There's actually in NESARA the creation of a national sales tax on new non-essential items only. So I call it kind of a luxury tax, although that's not exactly correct. It gives you a better flavor for it. Used items are not taxed by this national sales tax because NESARA really encourages recycling, tremendously encourages recycling, to take responsible care of our assets and our resources. The new sales tax will be applied to things like jewelry, new clothes, things of that sort, new cars. If you buy something absolutely new, it's never been used, you'll pay the new sales tax on it. You will not pay it on food, medication, and certain vital things that are necessary to life. So those things will be totally exempted. So this is how we will have our income revenue to support the government. Now, the government is going to become smaller, but there will, and definitely the military spending will be reduced, which I'm very happy about, because we're going to have peace declared. Immediately in the first few minutes of the NESARA announcement, peace will be declared by the NESARA president-designate, as well as the debt forgiveness, the new U.S. Treasury Bank backed by precious metals, and the fact that the Federal Reserve is being absorbed as far as facilities and buildings and people into the Treasury system, but we are through with the Federal Reserve notes and that banking system, that regulation, all their regulations and so on.
Well, what I heard you say earlier, too, Dove, is that the Federal Reserve is charging the government so much money. That will all, of course, be done away with, as will this huge military budget. There are people out there, good-hearted Americans, who truly believe that we've got huge threats out there from them. And the thems could be in Korea, they could be in Iraq, they could be just about any place, but there are us, they're the us'ns, and then there are the thems. How do you answer something like that? I mean, you know, what happens about that big, huge threat, maybe even atomic or biological warfare that so many people are afraid of?
Well, there's a couple of things about that. Number one, it is true, Virginia, there are conspiracies. And I will give you my definition of a conspiracy. I have worked at the highest levels with the highest levels of people in business corporations. I've sat in on executive meetings, and I have seen how executives make decisions. And basically what a conspiracy is it's a business decision that affects you that you are not notified about, nor are you allowed to give your input. It is a business decision to accomplish some goals that a certain business or organization is intending to accomplish, and it may well be to your detriment, but you are not informed about it, nor are you allowed to have any input or, in many cases, to make any changes.
It sounds like my father's reincarnated.
Well, that's what a conspiracy is, folks. And so get off the idea that it's not real. It's very real, and corporations do it every day. And I have sat in large corporation meetings and heard these things, these decisions made. In our case, what we have are oil corporations who run this country.
And pharmaceutical.
And pharmaceutical, yes. And they're all tied together.
Yep.
They're all tied together. They're all intermeshed. The Reagan years of deregulation allowed these large corporations to expand into other areas of business, and they all work together. And they have, at the very top echelon, number one in the Fortune 500 is Exxon. And Exxon owns large pieces of other major corporations and controls those corporations through its stock ownership. And, of course, people who own Exxon, we can go right to our Rockefeller and Bush families. Now, I will tell you flat out, there were no Arabs involved in 9/11. None whatsoever. And the people who are bringing us NESARA have absolute proof of that.
Dove, why don't you expand upon the actual divisions within government that exist, that where there's this group that wants the implementation, there's the existing entrenched system that continues to want to rule by intimidation and fear, and what all of us are familiar with, and then what actually was trying to be accomplished at the time of 9/11, and these factions that arose their ugly heads to try and stop it.
Well, I'm going to just use a term that I have borrowed from big business, from the Wall Street Journal and other big business reporting about how I call the people who are bringing this to us. I call the people who are bringing us NESARA the White Knights. They have another name for themselves, but it's kind of a stuffy name, so I don't use it. I like the term White Knights because, again, with my business background, I am familiar that White Knights in the world of big business, hostile takeovers, when a vulnerable company is being threatened with takeover by another company that they do not want to be part of, they look for a White Knight, corporation or person. A White Knight or corporation or person is a wealthy entity that can come to the rescue of a vulnerable company and either buy into that company or somehow prop them up so they are not being taken over by the hostile corporation that wants to buy them and maybe tear them apart and sell their assets, that kind of thing. So that's where I got my term, the White Knights. And the White Knights very definitely are rescuing our country from a hostile takeover. We did not have an election in 2000. We had a hostile takeover. That's what we had. And the White Knights started with the U.S. Supreme Court justices in 1993 who ruled in favor of the Farmers Union claims. And they then had to determine how to make their rulings happen and how to abolish the IRS, how to forgive credit card, mortgage, and other debts, how to get a U.S. Treasury bank system and precious metals-backed currency going, how to restore constitutional law, what to do about getting rid of the corruption in the government and Congress. And so what they did is they built coalitions of experts. They called in monetary experts, constitutional law experts, economic experts, judicial experts in addition to themselves, all kinds of experts, and not just from this country, but from around the world. And they built coalitions of people who helped them to come to build good plans and good concrete actions to carry out these transformations that needed to be done. And I call those people, all those people who are doing this around the world and here in the U.S., the White Knights.
And I think it's important that you're saying around the world as well as here in the U.S. Deb, we need to take a quick break, slip out for traffic and some sponsorship announcements. We're going to be coming back and specifically talking, letting you finish what you're saying right now, and then specifically talking about your views of what really happened on 9/11. Find out more about the subject we're talking about today and about Deb's work. She does a daily report on the Internet regarding the status of NESARA. And again, that is the, I'm finding my little notes here. Hold on here. It is the National Economic Security and Reformation Act. The acronym is NESARA, N-E-S-A-R-A. Find out all about that on the Internet at www.nesaranow.com. That's N-E-S-A-R-A now.com. Well, Deb, we've got so much to talk about here, but what I think I'm hearing you say is that you're just using a kind of a metaphor here and saying that there are groups of people who you're calling the White Knights, and that is, it has its inception in the corporate world when the White Knights come in and help to save a corporation from a hostile takeover. These White Knights are coming in to help us. So finish what you were saying about that, and then let's talk about your views about 9/11.
Okay, thank you. The White Knights are actually, we have a large group of White Knights here in the U.S., and there are White Knights around the world who have been working with ours. They are people in our judicial system, in government, in the military. We probably have 50,000 or more people in the military who are involved with what I call the White Knight military units that will be doing a lot of support work for NESARA when it's announced. There's a lot of things that need to happen, such as there need to be White Knights that go out and do some overseeing of the IRS closures of their different offices. They need to make sure that people are properly closing down those facilities. And a lot of other things that probably it's not safe for me to say as far as what they'll be doing, but they'll be good things for the country in terms of getting the new banking system put together and functioning and so on. And the resources that need to move around in the country will be done by some of our White Knight military. And they've helped the justices and the other White Knights a great deal in accomplishing things, bringing the gold into the country, for example. There needed to be a lot of gold and silver and platinum brought into the country and kept under guard in places that are not in the control of the government, or else we would lose that. So there's a lot of things, a lot of different people involved, people in the Federal Reserve banking system who, like Greenspan, want to get this Federal Reserve system out and get the new U.S. Treasury bank system in. Economic experts, constitutional law experts, a lot of White Knights all over and in other countries as well. I've written about this, so I'll just say that Margaret Thatcher is a White Knight, and she is helping to get the United Kingdom ready in Britain. There'll be some government changes in other countries as well as here, so there had to be a kind of overall worldwide effort. Now, they have got these things ready for what NESARA is going to do is ready. The basic preparations are in place. Occasionally there's interference with some of those things. They have to be fixed and then put back on target. But that, it's really ready to go any time. Now, you wanted to know about 911.
Yeah, explain the opposition group that exists and is so entrenched that it will do anything to keep its foothold.
Well, there is a group that wanted to put in place a new world order. George Bush Sr. spoke those words during his time in the Oval Office. Some other people have. There was an effort by Clinton to get Congress in the fall of 2000 to pass a resolution that would sign over the sovereignty of the U.S. to the UN. There was a real push in the year 2000 to get the New World Order process moving. And that, of course, got stopped. But the Bushes and the Rockefellers are very big players in the New World Order, and they always have been. And Bush Sr.'s father helped to, and the Rockefellers through Chase Manhattan, and Bush Sr.'s father through his bank in New England that he was involved in helped to fund Hitler. These people are not good Americans. They're globalists, and they have the plan of having just a few hundred people control the entire world. That's the New World Order plan. That was has been attempting to push forward for years, as most of us are aware of, or at least anyone paying attention to the alternative news. And in August of NESARA, I should mention, completely does away with that. There's no, once NESARA is announced, that New World Order thing is dead. Its head is cut off.
Yippee.
Pardon?
I said yippee.
Yeah, it's gone. It's over with. And they know that. They very much know that. And the Rockefellers and the Bushes and their friends up in the northeast part of the country especially, who have been supporting this elitist rulership of the world, have been fighting NESARA. And in August, NESARA was passed, I should say, secretly passed in March 2000 and signed into law on October 10th, 2000. And those were, by Clinton it was signed, those were things that were done to help move NESARA into position before the elections in 2000. Unfortunately, due to some betrayals by key people, it was not moved into place. So it's been working. The White Knights have been working to get NESARA announced now for a couple of years. And in August of 2001, they were making major headway. They were pushing forward on all fronts, getting the banking side of things straightened around, getting the Congress side of things. The congressional members have to resign within 72 hours of NESARA being announced. They were getting resignation letters signed ahead of time in August.
Just for the audiences, the resignations would occur so that because these people have been acting consciously, treasonously, and that's why they would have to resign.
Exactly. One of the things the justices found in their court overview, all the information that came before them in '93 was that there was a continual action by the administrative branch, the executive branch of the government, and Congress in ignoring the Constitution, and they were purposely and knowingly passing and signing unconstitutional laws. The pattern was so clear that there was no way to avoid realizing that the only way to fix the problem was to require the resignations of everyone in power at the federal level in terms of elected and appointed cabinet officials, the president, vice president, and Congress, because there's too many of those people, vast majorities of those people, who are purposely ignoring the Constitution.
And there was actually something that already took place with the White Knights in the past where many congresspersons resigned. That piece of history is in the past. Maybe you could expand on that, too.
There have been times, as I mentioned, in the 60s, there started to be efforts to clean up our government and our banking system. And one of those efforts was not too many years ago when a number of people in Congress were pressured to resign because of their corruption. And what NESARA does is it requires a complete clean sweep of Congress and our top federal officials and we have a temporary designate, president designate, vice president designate, and designate cabinet that will come in and hold the reins until the U.S. public is educated, and then we'll have new elections.
Well, let's take a break at that point because there's so much more to discuss here, and then at 8:15 I'll be opening up the phone lines and certainly encouraging you Seeing Beyond listeners to call in and talk about this intriguing subject. We're talking today with Dove, and we're talking about NESARA. That's spelled N.E.S.A.R.A. It is the National Economic Security and Reformation Act. She is feeling like it's going to come into place soon, perhaps even the beginning of the year 2003, will change just about every aspect of our lives. So we've got a lot more. I told you this would be a provocative program. We're certainly seeing beyond, aren't we? I'm Bonnie Colleen, and you too. Yes, you are seeing beyond. Welcome back. I'm Bonnie Colleen here with Stephen Hewer. Many of you remember Stephen from having been a frequent guest on Seeing Beyond. He's the founder of Cocoon Nutrition in Sunnyvale. You can find out more about him and his work at cocoonnutrition.org. Stephen and I are co-hosting the program today, and Cocoon Nutrition is a special sponsor of the program, and Steve is bringing to the Seeing Beyond audience Dove. That is the name that she is choosing to use. She's talking with us today about the National Economic Security and Reformation Act, known as NESARA. She's a member of a humanitarian project group, and after the NESARA law is announced, Dove says that she and thousands of other Americans will be receiving great amounts of money to do world improvement projects. Because she's been writing under the about the humanitarian projects funding on the Internet, she uses the pen name Dove of Oneness to maintain her privacy and avoid having thousands of people show up on her doorstep to ask for money after NESARA is announced. Importantly, I think Dove has been in the business world. She holds a bachelor's in business administration from City University in Bellevue, Washington, and a bachelor's in social sciences from Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. Her education and 20 years experience in business and large computer systems gives her insights into some of the complexities of the NESARA preparation activities. Dove has a history of activism in supporting alternative health options, world peace, and return to the Constitution. And again, you can find out more about her and her work at www.nesaranow.com, N-E-S-A-R-A now.com. Stephen, I'm so glad that you are sponsoring 2 hours because even 2 hours is way too short to get out all of the information that Dove wants to impart to Seeing Beyond listeners. So I've got some kind of agenda items here. First of all, and foremost of all, this is a kind of an unusual program for Seeing Beyond, but I do want to open up the phone lines at 8:15 and invite Seeing Beyond listeners to call in. That's my foremost agenda, Dove. My second agenda item is I want you to spend the next part of this segment talking about your views of what you believe actually happened on 9/11. And then I definitely want to cover the spiritual aspects of this that you mentioned earlier in the program, the first hour, because, of course, this is a program that is it has no religious bent at all, nor does it support one belief system over any other. It is a program where we allow people of differing opinions and belief systems to come together and to talk and to let Seeing Beyond listeners make up their own minds, but it definitely has a spiritual bent. So welcome back to the program, Stephen. Again, thank you so much for sponsoring, Dove being here. All right, Dove, I'm sure there are people out there sitting on pins and needles waiting for what you have to say, what your view, and I suppose many people's views are of 9/11.
Okay. Well, because NESARA was going to be announced in early September, and we could see that in the preparations that were going on in August. The White Knights were really pouring the fuel on to get all of the things that had to be handled done. And finally, on September 9, in a secret session with Congress, they did the last thing that needed to be done as far as the formalities. There was another approval of NESARA passed in a secret session of Congress that day, September 9, 2001. And the reason they didn't do NESARA the next day is because the White Knights have a 3-day bank closure calendar kind of thing that happens when NESARA is announced. There will be, constitutionally, we can have the banks closed, the lobbies closed for 3 days, but the ATMs and all of the, the other things, night deposit and what have you, will work. They will continue to work, continue to have plenty of money in them. The banks need to be, bankers and their staff need to be retrained and close out the books on the old system. So that's why you have to have the closure time for them to close out the old system and bring in the new system. So September 11th, Tuesday, September 11th, was the soonest date that the White Knights would be ready to do this, because then the banks would be closed on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and they would have Saturday and Sunday as well if they needed it to get all this work done inside the banks and all this retraining. So they set NESARA for the 11th of September, and the Bush regime actually got the people in Congress to stall this approval process, and they had it approved because there were new members of Congress. They wanted everybody to be to have approval of NESARA when it was announced. So they stalled it until that Sunday, and then knew that the White Knights would not try to announce NESARA until Tuesday. Every target that was hit had something to do with NESARA. The Tower 1 of the WTC, the World Trade Center, had an international banking computer center in the first and second floors of it, which were supposed to send out new data to all U.S. banks to load them and get them ready for the U.S. Treasury bank system. That was supposed to happen at 9 a.m. Eastern. They were supposed to start downloading that data into the U.S. banks. And in addition, the place in Pennsylvania, that was a target. And there was actually a circle drawn on the ground that was shown in the first few news coverages of that location. That was not an accident. There is something underground there that was key to the changing over of the banking system. I'm not allowed to tell you what's there because they're repairing it and they're going to use it in the future, so I can't tell you what it is. But there is a target under there, and the plane impact did enough damage to cause problems with that resource. The Pentagon, the exact place that was blown up, and there was not a Boeing commercial airplane that flew into the Pentagon. It was a small white plane loaded with explosives that was remotely flown into the Pentagon to blow up the Naval Center, the U.S. Navy's communication center that was supposed to be coordinating all the military support of NESARA and all the things that the military would be doing, moving gold around and that kind of thing after NESARA is announced. That communication center was blown up. That's why that part of the Pentagon was hit. And there were 3 levels of Pentagon defense that were turned off from the inside. And I have direct information that a woman who worked in that area was told not to come into work on Tuesday. On Monday she was there, September 10th, and her boss told her, do not come into work tomorrow, and whatever you do, don't go to the World Trade Center. There was foreknowledge. Our government was behind the attacks, and there were no Arabs involved. That's a cover story to give them an excuse to go attack Afghanistan and Iraq to try to get their oil. That's all that is, and that's all it ever was.
So, Deb, let me ask you this now. Weren't there any survivors in the World Trade Center or in the Pentagon who were in on this lining up the computers and that sort of thing, the preliminary work that needed to be done to get NESARA in, who knew about this? I mean, aren't there any survivors in any one of those places who could come forward and validate what you're saying, share this information?
Sure, but how would you do that when the people opposing NESARA own huge amounts of the media? And when the government has told the media, Ms. Rice has told the media that if they say anything against what the government wants them to say, that they're going to be shut out.
Well, as a matter of fact, it's interesting you'd bring that up. I obviously wanted to talk with you about the media, but it's interesting that I just got an email the other day from a friend of mine, and it was all about Dan Rather coming forth and saying, you know what, we've all been shutting up in the name of patriotism, and it's time for us to come forward and really do some investigation here.
Yes, exactly. They've been threatened. And it's not just that they've been told by the White House they can't look into things. I mean, look at how the White House stalled any inquiry and then tried to put one of their own buddies in charge of it, Mr. Kissinger, another New World Order buddy that they all work with. So, I mean, you couldn't get the truth out in the major media right now, although people like Donahue have tried to bring it out on MSN. But there's very few places that have. There's very, very few people who are willing to take on the government. Even when Donahue was questioning Ted Koppel says, oh, gee, Donahue, you're coming awfully close to treason with what you're saying about the Bush regime. Treason? They're the ones who've committed treason. You know, we're the ones who need to stand up to these people and kick them out of our country, and they weren't. And that whole fiasco of getting Bush Jr. into the White House was, well, the White Knights will talk about that afterwards. They'll explain what happened there. But
if the present government is so powerful, which obviously they are, how then will NESARA come into being? I mean, we've already seen, at least according to your view of this, what can happen when somebody wants to interfere.
Yeah. Well, what's been happening is since 9/11, a lot of people have jumped ship from the Bush camp. A lot of military have switched sides, some of them that were on the fence, and the military officers at the highest level all know this was a government job. They know it. They knew it then. They know it now. They knew it beforehand. But the White Knights did not have the overwhelming numbers of people siding with them that they do now. So there's a lot of military people who have come over. There's a lot of people in the government who have come over to the side of the White Knights. There's other people involved in various aspects of this who have shifted sides because that was too much.
Well, certainly Colin Powell is taking a more do I want to say humane or cautionary stance on going into Iraq? What's your view of what his positioning is?
Well, Colin Powell was actually supposed to be a White Knight, and when he got into, and he was supposed to help bring NESARA about, and there was a kind of negotiation between the justices and some of the top White Knights leaders and the Bush regime in this whole process, because the Bush regime had known for a long time that NESARA was coming, and after some of the damage was done in certain places, the banking center in New York had to be reset up in another location, and it had to be reinitialized, and a lot of records had to be recreated that had been lost there and so on, that had to do with the banking side of the changes of NESARA. So it took months to get it ready again. And they knew that. The White Knights knew it was going to take a while to get everything ready again so that they could announce it. So there was a negotiation. It's really weird how these things work. People can be sitting across the aisle, across the hallway from each other in the Pentagon or in some of the departments and be totally 100% against what the other person is doing. So you have White Knights sitting right next to or across the hallway from New World Order fanatics.
Well, in fact, that leads me to ask you this final question of this segment, because we do need to take a break in about a minute. But how is it that, have you self-selected to be a spokesperson for this, Dove? Have you been selected? How is it that you're here speaking in the fourth largest radio market in the United States about the issues that we're talking about today?
I would say I'm spirit selected. You know, I woke up from a 1993 near-death experience with a whole different understanding of life and what I was supposed to do here. And when I learned about NESARA in my activities of tracing what was going on with the humanitarian projects, I was literally, my codes were turned on. You know, I knew I was supposed to be doing this. I was supposed to be carrying this information. And the White Knights I have White Knight contacts who have supported me in getting the word out in the manner that I'm doing it, and helping to build support for NESARA to be announced, and also for them to see that there are a lot of people who support NESARA and want to get it announced. So I have to say I was selected by Spirit. That's the way I live my life.
Welcome back. I'm Bonnie Colleen. It is your turn to talk to our guest today. Steve Hewer is co-hosting Dove, and we're asking her our own questions, but certainly do invite your calls at 415-543-TALK. That's 415-543-TALK. All right, this is Jennifer in Oakland. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, and thank you for doing this. This is wonderful. I certainly hope all of this comes to pass, because the government that we've been experiencing certainly isn't one that's been of, for, and by the people for a very, very long time. I have two questions.
I can hear the emotion in your voice around that.
This is just, it really strikes, it cuts to my heart. It really does. At the beginning of the program, you mentioned that Washington changed something within the Bill of Rights, and I wondered if you could elaborate on exactly what that was. And I also have a question about the Federal Reserve. How, when, and why did that come into being?
Okay, well, actually it was FDR in 1933 changed a few words in the War Powers Act, in one of the War Powers Acts, that made the people of this country the enemy of the government. And we have been not under constitutional law, we've been under a form of military law since then. I don't want to say martial law, because that implies that you have soldiers on streets with guns in their hands, and we don't have that. And we will avoid having that. However, he did make, and he was one of the groups, I mean, he comes from the families that are into this world domination thing. And so he did that as part of his service to an entirely different master. On the Federal Reserve, that was another effort by the international bankers who are also part of this world domination group, and I'm not using that term lightly. Those people have been working for hundreds of years to take control, and their families just continue the traditions. The international bankers wanted to get the wealth of the U.S. and to have control of the U.S. wealth, which is mainly stored through banks and through property. And so they arranged for the Federal Reserve Act to be passed in a very questionable way in the middle of the night during the Christmas break of Congress in 1913, I think it was. And that was strictly for the international bankers to gain control of our country's wealth. And the Rothschild family is well known as being an international banking family. Baron Rothschild said it very well. I don't care who controls the government. If I control the banks, I control the country. So that's what that was about. They have done a very good job of siphoning off the wealth of this country, and that's all being stopped with NESARA. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Thanks for calling in, Jennifer.
And you can do something to help. Jennifer, you can send a postcard to the U.S. Supreme Court, 1 First Street, Washington, D.C., 20543, and urge them to get NESARA announced. I understand we started doing this campaign with the justices because we know that they don't understand how many Americans support these kinds of changes. They are constantly being told by the politicians in D.C. that this isn't going to fly and Americans aren't going to like it and blah, blah, blah. And that's not true at all.
And, Dove, is all of Congress on board with this?
There's a few dozen that are good people. The rest of Congress has committed treason, and there's evidence that they have. And so they have passed the NESARA law because they were given a choice. You will either pass the law or you'll be arrested for treason. And so they have a way to get out of their situation gracefully and to gracefully resign and pretend to be statesmen, and that's fine. Although a lot of what's been going on is going to come out in exposés after NESARA is announced to educate the people.
All right, let me just say that you can send postcards, and Dove is putting out the information that it's much better to send a postcard because of the anthrax threat, that they won't probably open up letters. And let me give you that address again, Jennifer, for you and other Sting Beyond listeners who might want to do this and offer your support. The U.S. Supreme Court, 1 First Street, Washington, D.C., 20543. And again, that zip is 20543. Some very good questions there, Jennifer, which means that we do have one other line available at 415-543-TALK, 415-543-TALK. Dove, just a curiosity question. Why not email?
Well, emails are frequently lost in D.C. The Supreme Court justices don't have a public email address either, and so we aren't using that route. But I'm sure you remember hearing news reports about how emails never got through to Congress. Hundreds of thousands of them were blocked from getting through. Mm-hmm. We've used email at times, those of us who are activists for this, and it's been useful in certain situations. But on this one, actually having a physical postcard, there are piles and piles of these postcards. Over 200,000 of them have been received since mid-October when we started doing this.
All right, so that's U.S. Supreme Court, 1 First Street, Washington, D.C., 20543.
And that basically what you want to say on the postcard is announce NESARA now. The law exists, it just hasn't been enacted. The announcement enacts it, and that's the message that everyone that wants this to happen needs to put on that postcard.
All righty, here's Dennis in San Francisco. If you'd like to call in and be on the air with Dove, Stephen Huer and Bonnie Colleen, it's 415-543-TALK. Hi, Dennis.
Good morning, dear lady. One of the best programs I've heard you done in 14 years. I'm serious.
Yeah, it has been almost 14 years, hasn't it?
Yes, love. You've done a great job, too. Thank you.
You're welcome, Dennis.
Dove, I would like to just say thank you for putting this information out. As a humanitarian myself and knowing, wasn't the Justice Department enacting putting Bush in office? And can you explain how that is and what's going on with that right now?
Okay, I guess I will, because you're asking it directly. What was going on in December 2000, there's a portion of this process with the new banking system that requires funds move over from Europe, where they've been accumulating for 50 and 60 and more years, and they move over from there into the U.S., and there was a problem with getting those funds moved over. Constitutionally, the U.S. Treasury bank system has to use money that comes from outside the current banking system. The current banking system is fraudulent. Therefore, to start a new banking system, we have to have funds that come from another place. And there are Americans and others, wealthy visionaries, who have been building these funds for years to enable this and all these other things that have to happen. So there was a problem with getting those funds over, and there was going to be a time frame of some months, and the justices knew this because they're involved with this part of it. They're involved with all parts of getting this whole NESARA law implemented. So they also were being, I'll just have to say it, they were being threatened by the Bushes. The Bush regime. Remember in the Florida recount when a bunch of young rowdies, so-called Republicans, kind of attacked one of the recount centers? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Well, the Bushes used that as an example of what they would cause. They were threatening civil war. And the justices made a business decision that they could not implement NESARA at that point because they didn't have the funds fully transferred from Europe, and it would take some time to get them done. And they sat down, they negotiated a contract with the Bushes. And the Bushes were threatening people they knew, were threatening family members, friends, were threatening to hurt people, were threatening to kill people. I'm not kidding, this is all true.
No, she isn't. She's right.
And what the justices decided was that they weren't strong enough then to handle a civil war. And the Bushes were definitely determined to do that, and they did hurt some people. It never came out in the media, but some people were hurt. And one of the justices refused to go along with this, and people that were targeted that she was told would be hurt were hurt because of it. So they essentially were strong-armed into selecting Junior.
Okay.
And it was a 6-month contract, and it was a signed contract, and Junior was supposed to step down within or after 6 months. And as soon as they could get the pieces of NESARA that had to be done for the banking system completed. And, of course, we know that he did not do that. And that's what happened. These people have been massively attacked. The justices, many of the people who are supporting NESARA have been attacked. Some of their family members have been killed. They've been kidnapped. They've been attacked with lawsuits on a daily basis, frivolous lawsuits, but it takes a lot of energy out of them. All kinds of things to try to stop NESARA. So I can't really blame the justices. They were carrying the torch for, 7 years at that point. They had fought through a world court battle. The Clinton administration took the U.S. Supreme Court to world court to try to overturn their decisions in '93. They fought through that. They won. These people have been through a lot, and they couldn't take the responsibility of a civil war in the country at that time, and that's what the Bush-Rockefeller regime gang, I call them the Bush gang, they're like a bunch of outlaws, were actually trying to do at that time. They threatened that, and they did some things that the justices were informed about that made it very clear that that was a serious threat.
Janice, thanks for calling in, and I'm really impressed with the intelligent questions, the well-thought-out questions that you Seeing Beyond listeners have this morning. Dove, it sounds like it's been a heck of a struggle, to say the least. Why then do you believe that this, enacting of the NESARA will be happening imminently?
Well, for one thing, most people on this planet are good people. The folks who are pushing the New World Order and the world domination are really in the minority. There's a few millions out of the billions that are on the planet, and some of those that are pushing the New World Order have switched sides, and some who were just kind of supporting the Bush-Rockefeller camps are switching sides. And a great number of bankers in the U.S. have switched sides. They have decided that they don't want to support what's going on with the Bush regime. And every time that we go public with this, and every time, and my newsletter, by the way, is read by most of the top bankers. It's read by the intelligence agencies in D.C., the Bush, the White House, certainly reads it every day. I have a lot of people who are in the middle of this on both sides, white knights and the Bush regime, who read my newsletter, and I put out what our people, my subscribers, are doing, and we're getting the word out. We've been putting out flyers. We've been going to peace marches, handing out flyers on NESARA. We've been doing all kinds of creative things, and every time one of those messages goes out that overviews what everyone is doing, I have 10,000 subscribers, and they forward on by fax and email, and I get posted on other websites. I reach over 250,000 people in the world. And these people are activists for NESARA, many of them. And when we put out what people are doing, the bankers call the white knight justices and tell them they're switching sides. So we have more and more military switching sides to the white knights. They don't like what's going on. They don't want to be Gestapo of this country or any place else. And we have bankers, we have other influential people in government and other places who are switching sides. So September 11 didn't help the Bush regime in that a lot of people said this is going too far, we can't support this, and have since switched sides. Now there's some actual evidence that things are happening. There's been some news reports from the IRS that they are reorganizing, and they are laying off thousands of people in Ogden, Utah, and Cincinnati, and places like their major regional headquarters, and they're claiming that they're just shifting the load. But that's not true. The IRS expects to be closed down, fully closed down by summer of 2003. and they are not rehiring these people or telling you where they're putting the load that they're moving from these centers. They're just leaving that and just saying this is reorganization. They're not allowed to say that they're closing because of NESARA. So that is something that's actually in the news that people who don't know how to read government speak believe on face value, but that's not what's happening. They have to start preparing to close these offices down and these thousands of people that work for them. In addition to that, we have some other help, and this is where the spiritual aspect of this comes in.
You know, I want to put a bookmark in that because I really want to spend the last segment today of you discussing the spiritual aspect of that. I think that that is going to be of paramount importance to my listening audience, and I want to give people their own chance to call in and talk with you. Sorry, we missed one call, so do call back at 415-543-TALK, 415-543-TALK. And we're glad you're calling in, Julie. Julie's in San Francisco. Hi there, Julie.
Hi, good morning. Thanks. I've been intuitively thinking along the same lines that you're presenting with all this important factual information for quite some time. And are you suggesting that maybe CIA-type people were actually flying those planes and that they just trumped up the Arabs, the Saudis who were on those airplanes, is number one. Number two, I'm worried about the national database and the security of all of our information. There's a company called DynCorp, which is run by Herb Winokur, who was on the audit board of Enron and also on the development board and board of directors of Harvard, and a big buddy of the Bushes. And I'm worried about our information being used in a massive database. And finally, about the economy. Is this going to make the stock market go down when all this happens?
Great questions. Okay, first one was the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this was a CIA operation, and it was a hastily thrown together operation. In July of 2001, military officers told people in a meeting in Europe that the military would be in Afghanistan in October of 2001, that they would be actively waging war in Afghanistan. Now, this was 2 months prior to September 11. So this was a Bush plan that was there a long time. In August, because the White Knights were making such great strides, the CIA designated roughly 100 people in a CIA group, came up with the entire scenario for September 11, and the planes were piloted remotely. I won't say exactly how, but I have said in my reports on the Internet that there were processes used to control those planes by the CIA, and those planes were purposely flown into those targets by the CIA. Their processes they were using. Your third one is about the economy. Credit card debt and mortgage debt. The minute that NESARA is announced, your credit card gets zeroed out, all your balances. Your mortgages, your car loans, your education loans are put on suspension. No payments will be accepted after NESARA is announced and for a period of months while people submit their applications for these things to be forgiven. The banks get $8,500 per credit card to zero these out. So the banks are not going to go down. The banks are making money on this. You probably noticed you had a lot of credit card applications in your mail for the last 2 years. That's why. The banks have been wanting people to open up lots and lots of credit card accounts so they could get lots and lots of money, and they don't give you an $8,500 limit, but that's an average of credit card debt that Americans have. They will also get paid for the mortgages. They'll get paid for all the loans that are being zeroed out. And the loans, all this stuff has to be zeroed out because when you change from a fraudulent banking system to a new banking system, you have to close the books on the old system. And that's one of the ways of doing it. And there wasn't any other more fair way, plus it gives financial remedy to Americans for being defrauded by the government and the banks for so long. Your last question was the stock market. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, and I should also say that with the IRS being abolished immediately, you'll pay no income tax from that time forward. from the announcement forward. So you can see right away you've got money in your pocket. If you're a normal American person who's working, you've got no IRS taxes going out, so you've got money in your pocket from that. You aren't paying for mortgage or education loans or car loans or credit card debt, so you've got money in your pocket from saving for that. All that's taken away, and you have that money to use for yourself. On the stock market will be closed for a short time while we get educated about the new economic and monetary system, and the stock market values are being protected. So the White Knights have been very careful to build a protection plan. They know people have their retirement and other things in the stock market. The stock market values will be protected, and they'll come out. There's going to be a whole shift in the values of our economy and how things are priced and so on. That's part of going to the gold standard, and that will all be explained. But what will happen is people's stock market investments are protected. They will stay protected. So you're not going to lose anything there. What we're going to have is a great celebration because we're going to have more money in our pockets.
And what about the databases that are being developed?
Yes, that is going to be dismantled, and the information will be destroyed. And so will all the other things that the government has been tracking us on. They have no business doing that under constitutional law. And there are many, many, many changes in the snooping of the government. Much of that, almost all of it is going to be totally removed.
Julie, thanks for calling in. Some very good questions. Finish that thought. We need to go to traffic.
Sure. I'm just going to say the only time the bank can ever ask you a question about your money after NESARA is if they think it's counterfeit. Other than that, it's none of their business.
Thanks for being here, Deb. When we come back, we're going to be talking about your views of the spiritual aspects of everything that we've been talking about. Glad you're with us. I'm Bonnie Colleen. You are Seeing Beyond. Time for Mitch and our traffic. Oh, welcome back. I'm Bonnie Colleen. We're talking about NESARA, and that stands for, it's an acronym for the National Economic Security and Reformation Act. N.E.S.A.R.A. Find out more about it on the internet at www.NESARAnow.com. Do remember that Dove, our guest, does a daily report on the internet regarding the status of NESARA and related subjects. That's 7 days a week. And again, that's NESARAnow.com. She also has all radio interviews made available on that website. And if you'd like to email her, her address is dove@4winds10.com. That's dove@4, F-O-U-R, wins, W-I-N-D-S, 10, the number 10.com. And again, I want to thank Stephen Hewer of Cocoon Nutrition for promoting this program, for sponsoring it. And you can find out more about him and his work with holistic medicine at www.cocoonnutrition.org. Well, Dove, you said something that really got my attention very near the beginning of our programming, and that was that all of the work that you're doing and the information that you're being given and the work of the White Knights, et cetera, is really spirit-driven. At least that's my understanding of what you said, but it's your story. Please fill us in about what you meant.
Okay. Well, a lot of different cultures and religions and spiritual understandings mark this time in history as an important time, as a time when something big is going to happen. And we know from quantum physics that we have potential futures. We have more than one future that we can choose from. It's something that we've learned about getting away from the linear point of view that there's only something that happens and then something happens after that, but instead what we're finding out and what other cultures have known for a long time, including some of the early Christian writings and many of the Eastern philosophies and Indian philosophies, is that there's multiple options that we have. And one of the reasons I do my work is because I'm influencing people to choose the potential future, the option that includes having NESARA announced and all of these great and uplifting transformations. And we're in that time frame where we are making the change from one age, which the Tibetans call the Kali Yuga, to the new age of whatever we're going to end up choosing. And I know we're going to choose the uplifting path. This is my knowing. I'm absolutely positive of it. And we have a lot of help in getting this done. There are ascended masters who are actually helping, nuts and bolts, helping with this process. One of them was very instrumental in getting the United States created, and that is the Ascended Master Saint Germain. Now, most people think that Ascended Masters sit on a cloud somewhere and send love and maybe some information. That's not all that they do. Certainly they do that, but I have learned from our white knight naval military people that the Ascended Masters actually sit in meetings with the leaders of this country, with the leaders of other countries, with major banking leaders, and they talk about the changes that need to be done and what needs to be done. These are heavy-duty ex-Navy SEALs, people who are very down-to-earth, who are in meetings with these major spiritual lights who are telling them and helping them to move this forward. This is the time of change on this planet. It's the time to leave the age of darkness, the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, and come to the age of enlightenment. And I did not know that Saint Germain and Sananda, which is another name for Jesus the Christ, were involved in this at all when I first got started. I was talking to white knight sources in D.C. some of whom attend the meetings of the G8. Do you know what the G8 are?
No.
Okay. They're the Global 8. It's the leaders of the top 8 industrial countries. So Britain, Japan, the U.S., the list does change from time to time, but Canada, the major countries, the major industrialized countries have a group they call the Global 8, and those are the top 8 industrial countries in the world, and they've just added China. Russia's in there. They've just recently added China, so it makes it the G9, really. But with our controlled media, we don't probably hear about China being part of it. That was a deal that Bush Jr. struck to let China in on that. These meetings are Blair Jr., Putin, Bush Jr., these other top leaders meet together, and once in a while you'll see it in the news that they're having a meeting, the G8's having a summit meeting, or they're having an economic meeting or something, and they discuss what they're going to do, how they're going to run the world, basically, is what it amounts to. And Sananda and Saint Germain have visited these meetings and talked to these world leaders about the future and how they must cooperate because the future of the planet is to go into the age of enlightenment, and that these tyrannies and these manipulations of people are a thing that is coming to an end, and they can either do it gracefully or they can do it in a opposition mode. But regardless, it is happening. The first time I heard about this, I was rather amazed. I was totally amazed. I was like everybody else. I had no idea what Ascended Masters really do. And I was hearing about a meeting that was during the Clinton administration. They were having a meeting in the bowels of the White House in one of their super secret rooms of the G8, and Saint Germain and Sananda beamed in, if you will, and spoke to them for 3 hours. And our white knight in the White House recounted this meeting to us, and how initially when they came in, some of the guards kind of went for their guns, and a voice said, if you try to do that, you'll be annihilated immediately. So Clinton said, well, I guess we won't, stand down, boys. We won't do anything. And then they listened to Sananda and Saint Germain talk to them about the future of the planet and what needed to happen and what their parts in it were supposed to be, and how they had choices they could make about how this would go for them personally. And that was one of the first meetings I heard about, and there have been meetings since. And St. Germain actually has, because of his tremendous love for the United States and for the children of light of North America, which he has spoken about many times in some of his information that he has passed on, he actually has an office near Washington, D.C., and he is in constant attendance at meetings with the Bush regime, with the White Knights, and has been for months to help bring this about. He has worked very hard with inspiring the writers of the NESARA law. Sananda is also supporting this. The United States was always the dream of St. Germain, and to have a nation of enlightened beings was always his dream. And he's worked very hard to make this happen here. And he is also the God of freedom. He's known as the God of freedom, and so he was actually present when the Bill of Rights and the Constitution were being put together, and made a very important speech when the Founding Fathers were faltering at the last minute signing the Declaration of Independence. He appeared in a locked room and spoke to them and encouraged them to sign it, and they did. So he has been involved all along.
And that, of course, according to Dove, is our good news. You can find out more about her work, about NESARA, at www.nesaranow.com. Let me spell that for you. It's N-E-S-A-R-A now.com. You can also send an email to Dove at dove@fourwinds10.com. That's Dove at F-O-U-R-Winds, and then the number 10.com. She actually does daily reports on the Internet regarding the status of NESARA and related subjects 7 days a week, and all of her radio interviews are made available on the Internet, and also you can find them by going to that same website, which is www.nesaranow.com. Deb, I want to thank you so much for taking a full 2 hours to be here with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, Steve Hewer, I want to thank you for being here, holding up the energy, asking your own questions, co-hosting the program, and sponsoring Dove here on Seeing Beyond this morning. Steve Hewer is a nutritional consultant. He's a holistic practitioner. He's got a beautiful company called Cocoon Nutrition, and you can find out more about that at www.cocoonnutrition.org, or call them toll-free at 888-988-3325. That's 1-888-988-3325. And I especially want to thank you, Seeing Beyond listeners, who called in this morning with some very educated and intelligent questions. You know, you are the questers out there. You're the ones who ask the questions. You're the ones who seek information. And most importantly, you're the ones who act upon it. I'm Bonnie Colleen. We've got a whole new hour with you. We'll be back right after this, once again, Seeing Beyond.